Okay, settle in. Imagine waking up tomorrow and the sun. Well, it just isn't there anymore.
Poof.
Yeah, poof, gone. What's the very first thing you'd notice? How would you even know it happened straight away?
That's the kicker, isn't it?
And like, how quickly would everything just unravel?
It's the ultimate cosmic disappearing act, really.
Huh?
And it makes you face how much our reality, depends on that star.
Totally.
The implications are just huge. They ripple outwards immediately.
Absolutely. And that's exactly the incredible scenario we're diving into today. We've got insights from a bunch of sources you've shared with us, some explainer videos breaking down the science, articles looking at the planetary effects.
Right, the big picture stuff.
And even this really detailed, okay, it's fictional, but a detailed story of trying to survive it all in a bunker.
Yeah, that one's quite something. Our goal here is basically to sift through all this. We want to pull out the key facts.
Yeah.
Trace the timeline of what happens according to these sources, and look at what kind of, long shot survival ideas people have even come up with.
Okay, let's get right into it then. The sources, they all seem to agree on one really mind-bending thing right at the start.
Uh-huh.
If the sun just vanished, you wouldn't know. Not for about 8 minutes. Why is that?
It's because light, well, it doesn't travel instantly, does it? It's incredibly fast, obviously.
But not instant.
Exactly. The light and the heat hitting Earth right now, it actually left the sun about 8.5 minutes ago.
Wow.
So those first few minutes, you'd still see the sun, feel its warmth, totally unaware it's already gone.
That is just wild. You could be, I don't know, making coffee, complaining it's too hot.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, the source of it all isn't even there anymore.
And it's not just light, According to the sources, gravity travels at the same speed, the speed of light.
Okay.
So after those first 8 minutes or so pass, Earth wouldn't just get dark and cold.
It would also lose its connection.
Yeah, it loses the gravitational pull holding it in orbit around the sun. The anchor's gone.
Okay, so instead of orbiting, we just fly off into space.
That's right. Earth would just keep going.
Yeah.
In whatever direction it was heading at that exact moment, the gravity disappeared.
Like a stone from a slingshot.
Pretty much, yeah. Basically heading in a straight line out into interstellar space. Some sources say the speed would be around 18 miles per second.
Drifting, or maybe speeding is a better word. Through the void.
Speeding is definitely more accurate. And the sources, they explore this almost unthinkable idea that if Earth somehow dodged hitting anything out there, rogue planets, asteroids.
Which seems unlikely, maybe.
Well, space is big. But yeah, if it didn't get captured by something else either, it could wander for just an unimaginable amount of time before maybe finding another star.
How long are we talking?
One source put the time frame at possibly 43,000 years.
43,000 years.
Yeah, it's a journey through just profound, empty cold.
Speaking of cold, okay, so those 8 minutes are up. Boom, instant darkness, right?
Well, yeah. Apart from the distant stars, they'd still be there.
But the moon, it reflects sunlight, so...
The moon would go dark instantly, and that's when the temperature would start to drop fast.
How fast are we talking? How quickly does it get, seriously cold?
The sources paint a pretty grim picture there.
Yeah.
Within about a week, give or take, global temperatures would start dipping below freezing, 0 Celsius.
Just a week. Wow.
And one source suggests that after only a year, the average global temperature could hit minus 233 degrees Celsius.
Minus 233.
Yeah. Another source mentions surface temps near a specific facility reaching minus 237 Celsius within just a couple of months.
Minus 233. That's not just cold. That's like cryogenics cold. That would freeze everything solid on the surface, wouldn't it?
It absolutely would. And this rapid freezing, it isn't the only immediate problem.
Right, because no sunlight means...
Photosynthesis stops dead.
Ugh, yeah. Plants can't grow. The whole base of the food chain just vanishes.
Precisely. Most crops fail instantly.
Sure.
Herbivores run out of food really quickly.
And then the carnivores follow.
Exactly. Everything starves. Now, some big trees, maybe they could survive for a few decades on stored energy. But the vast, vast majority of plants and surface animals, gone. Relatively quickly.
What about the oceans? Do they freeze solid too?
The surface layers certainly would, yeah. Within weeks or months, you'd have a thick ice cap.
But not all the way down.
Probably not for a very, very long time. Because the oceans are so huge, and you still got heat radiating from Earth's core.
Ah, geothermal heat.
Exactly. So the deeper parts could stay liquid for maybe thousands of years. And that's where some unique life might hang on.
Like what kind of life?
Well, things like certain deep-sea organisms near hydrothermal vents, and these other things called chemolithotroph.
Chemolithotrophes. Okay, what are they?
They're fascinating, actually. They don't need sunlight for energy like plants.
How do they live then?
They get energy from chemical reactions,
Mm-hmm.
often around those deep-sea vents or even like in rock deep underground.
Okay.
So life in those very specific spots, deep, warm pockets, might actually keep going, potentially for billions of years until the planet's core itself cools right down.
So surface life is basically doomed. The planet's flying off into this cosmic deep freeze.
Yep.
And it's getting unbelievably cold. This sounds, overwhelmingly bleak.
The sources definitely confirm that.
Yeah.
Long-term, widespread survival on the surface for complex life like us humans, functionally impossible, not without some seriously extreme measures.
Which brings us to that really interesting, though, again, fictional story we looked at.
A bunker.
Yeah, this idea of trying to build this massive, self-sustaining underground bunker.
It's laid out as this detailed thought experiment in one source,
Yeah.
outlining the just incredible challenges, but also potential solutions for a group trying to build a habitat deep underground.
To basically ride out the apocalypse.
Exactly.
And the main reason for going deep underground was tapping into that geothermal heat, wasn't it?
That was the key. Dig down far enough to benefit from the Earth's core heat. Maybe find areas near, like lava tubes or hot groundwater.
Because the surface is hitting minus 200-something degrees.
Right. That heat source would be absolutely critical. Non-negotiable, really.
They started, according to this account, using explosives to dig out quickly.
Yeah, to excavate fast.
Right.
And then building the main walls out of iron blocks.
Iron.
That was the initial setup in the story, building the basic living spaces, places to sleep, wash, cook,
But just being deep underground with iron walls wasn't enough, was it? The source said the cold started getting in after only about 10 days.
That's a key point. The sheer cold intensity on the surface would eventually seep down, even deep underground.
Right.
So they quickly realized they needed serious insulation. And, crucially, a powerful, dedicated heating system.
And to run a heater, you need power, which led them, in the story, to build a nuclear generator.
Yes, the nuclear generator was basically identified as the only practical way to get continuous long-term power for everything.
Heating, lights, air.
All of it.
Okay.
And this involved, the incredibly risky job of going back to the surface to get uranium, then building a super heavily shielded room down there.
Okay, so power and heat, potentially sorted. What about air? How do you breathe down there forever?
That's a huge challenge the sources talk about.
Yeah.
Because photosynthesis stopped up top.
The oxygen in the atmosphere eventually runs out.
Right. So the bunker scenario looked at a couple of ways. First, using that underground water source they found and running an electric current through it, electrolysis, to split the water molecules, H2O, into hydrogen and oxygen.
Okay, makes sense.
But the account notes, they figured out that relying just on that would use up their precious water way too fast.
Ah, finite resource.
Exactly. So the second method was trying to basically copy photosynthesis inside the bunker, using plants and artificial light.
Ah, okay. Like recreating the sun's job, but indoors.
Pretty much.
But where do you get plants when everything on the surface is, like, dead or frozen solid?
The fictional story describes this dangerous trip back, topside, specifically to gather plants and seeds.
Right.
They initially looked at pine trees, apparently, because they're tough in the cold.
Yeah.
But the really crucial thing was getting into a global seed bank.
Like the ones we have in the real world. The Svalbard one, maybe?
Exactly like those. Facilities designed to save all sorts of plant seeds just in case of catastrophe.
So they brought back, like, a Noah's Ark of seeds? That makes sense.
Yeah. Bringing those seeds back let them set up an indoor garden. They needed powerful artificial lights, obviously, to mimic sunlight.
To get the plants doing photosynthesis and making oxygen.
Exactly.
Okay, so air and heat, potentially covered, but food, people got to eat.
Food was the next critical bit. They used the vegetable and grain seeds from that seed bank to start an indoor farm. Again, needing those artificial lights, the source even talks about an automated system for watering and harvesting.
Okay, so wheat, vegetables, gets you carbs, vitamins, but protein.
This is where the story gets particularly inventive. They realized land animals are gone, right?
Yeah.
And bringing cows or chickens or whatever into the bunker would just eat up too many plant resources. So they turned to the oceans.
The frozen ocean.
Yes.
Yeah.
They described another trip to the surface needing extreme cold suits and stuff and found the ocean totally frozen over. But
What?
they found frozen fish trapped in the ice.
And they, what, chipped them out? Brought frozen fish back to thaw out?
According to this source, yeah.
Uh,
They managed to bring back these frozen fish, put them in an aquarium down in the bunker, and somehow revive them.
Revive frozen fish. That sounds optimistic.
Extremely optimistic, I'd say. But, okay, in the context of the story, they did it. And then they built a whole fish farming setup to have a continuous protein source.
Okay. I mean, wow. But all right, food, water, air, heat, power. They've sort of tackled the absolute basics for survival.
They did, but the fictional account goes further. It highlights needing, long-term psychological well-being, too,
Sure.
not just staying alive.
Ah, right. Because living underground forever, no sunlight, no outside world, that would mess with your head.
Severely. So they realized they needed more.
So they built, what, a rec room?
Kind of. And this is where it gets really interesting. They included things like a tanning machine.
For UV light?
Yeah, for vitamin D, health, maybe mood,
Yeah.
and a sauna and a hot spring using that geothermal heat
Right.
for relaxation, therapy, and a library, recognizing that people need mental stimulation, knowledge, just escape over potentially thousands of years down there.
That's actually a surprisingly complete picture for a doomsday bunker. It's not just about breathing and eating.
It really shows that true long-term survival in that kind of extreme situation means thinking about way more than just the absolute rock-bottom basics.
The source also mentioned a crisis happening down there, though. The nuclear generator started to melt down.
Yes, the fictional scenario threw in a critical moment.
Yeah.
The generator overheated, became unstable. And what's fascinating is how the very thing threatening them.
The cold outside.
Exactly. The extreme cold became their temporary fix.
How? Oh, wait. Because the power failure meant their internal water froze.
That's it. The water tanks for the farm, the hot spring, all solid ice. So their emergency plan, as the story goes, was to open a vent to the surface.
What? Let in minus 237-degree air.
Yep. Use that incredibly cold air to directly cool the generator core and stop the meltdown.
Talk about using your environment, even when it's actively trying to kill you.
It really highlights how interconnected everything was in that artificial system they built.
Yeah, one thing goes wrong.
Exactly. A single point of failure, like the power generator, just cascades. Loss of heat, water freezes, oxygen stops being made, lights go out. It shows how fragile even a super carefully planned system is.
So they had to fix that permanently.
Yeah. They then apparently built a proper, dedicated cooling system for the generator, using that principle of bringing in the outside cold air in a controlled way.
So after all that,
Yeah.
these huge challenges, they did manage to create this functional, isolated underground world. The source paints this picture of the routine, right? Tending the fish farm, growing crops, using the tanning bed, hitting the sauna, reading.
A very structured, contained existence.
Ah.
It serves as this really detailed blueprint, even though it's fiction, of the sheer scale of engineering, resource management, and just complexity needed for even a theoretical survival strategy if the sun disappeared.
Stepping back from the bunker idea for a second, this whole deep dive, it really just lays bare how incredibly dependent we are on the sun.
Absolutely.
It's so much more than just, light and warmth for a sunny day.
It's the gravity anchor, keeping us in a stable orbit. It's the fundamental energy driving photosynthesis.
Which is the base of basically the entire surface ecosystem. It makes our food the oxygen we breathe.
Yeah, if you connect this to the bigger picture, the sources really hammer home that everything we experience, climate, plants, animals, us, is utterly dependent on that constant energy and gravity from the sun.
The idea of it just vanishing, it's a stark reminder, almost terrifying, of our place in the solar system. So what does this all mean? We've looked at the immediate loss of light and gravity, the crazy drop in temperature turning the surface into this frozen wasteland, the collapse of most life because photosynthesis stops.
Right.
Then we saw this incredibly detailed, fictional attempt at surviving underground, showing just how complex, how resource-heavy, how technically demanding that would be, needing solutions for literally everything: heat, power, oxygen, food, even mental health.
The sources, taken together, they really reinforce that without the sun, Earth just becomes this dead rock hurtling through space.
And then there's that almost unimaginable time scale you mentioned earlier.
Tens of thousands of years.
Yeah, potentially tens of thousands of years drifting through endless freezing darkness, just hoping to maybe find another star.
Which leads to a final thought, maybe, for you listening. Consider that concept. Our entire planet, just a tiny frozen speck on this unbelievably long, cold journey through nothingness. What does that tell us about how fragile, how unique our current existence actually is, thriving here, bathed in light and held by the gravity of our very own star.